Well, on the last occasion, when we were discussing sovereignty, we concluded with Hobbes, who mainly maintained that sovereignty is undivided, indivisible, unlimited, inalienable, and permanent. To him, sovereignty is totally unitary, or it is nothing. And he did not accept any division of sovereign power. His successor in the same century, John Locke, he viewed it in something different angle because of, again, the political context of the time. In the 1680s, especially towards the end of the decade 1688, England had a glorious revolution, and there was change of monarchy. Monarchy was there, change of monarch, and on an understanding between the nobles and the monarch. And on this theme, in which Locke was very much interested, because in the whole confabulation of the political developments of the time, Locke himself was personally related, and he supported the cause of parliamentary democracy. That the new understanding that was arrived in 1688 was that government of England and Scotland will be conducted primarily by the cabinet, and the monarch will be there to preside over the whole system. So, philosophically, Locke formulated his theory of sovereignty like this, that contrary to Hobbes, sovereignty is divisible, and in fact should always be divided between the monarch and parliament. And parliament's power of sovereignty will be exercised by the cabinet or the council of ministers, who claim to be the real representative of the people. Now, this was given a nice theoretical form by John Locke by his contract theory. In some historical moment, the hypothetical situation was taken up when there was a contract to establish civil society and political life. And that was, according to Locke, there were two contracts, one between the people and the monarch, the sovereign, and the second was a contract between people themselves. And it is because of this fact that conclusion of Locke was this, that governing power, the sovereign power, internal as well as external sovereignty, will be exercised by the monarch on behalf of the people. To be more precise, on the consent of the people, government will remain in office. The moment there is any lack of confidence or trust of the people, and for that matter in the parliamentary system, the representatives of the people, the effective sovereign, that is the cabinet, has to go. And therefore, in Locke's idea, sovereignty is not only divisible, it ought to be divisible. So we find that Locke gave a new formulation, and that formulation was basically what is called the formulation of democratic theory of sovereignty, which means the sovereign power effectively is exercised by parliament. Next contract theorist was Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the celebrated philosopher of France, or revolutionary France, so to say. Now he, again because of the situation he lived in, that situations arising of which ultimately French Revolution took place. That means in the second half of the 18th century in France, already commotion started in the civil society, and the ideologues, they were spreading revolutionary messages. They were saying something for protecting the powers of the people as against the Bourbon dynasty's effective autocracy. So he formulated his own theory of contract, culminating in his own version of sovereignty. That was that from the state of nature, when people decided to form the civil society and political community, there was a contract. And the contract was that everybody surrendered his power to everybody. So when everybody surrenders to everybody, practically nobody surrenders to anybody. So that was the paradox start with Rousseau. And therefore he claimed at the same time complete popular sovereignty, that is, sovereignty lies with the people. But at the same time, he was also very conscious about the point that Hobbes wanted to make. That is, for effectiveness of governance, it is absolutely necessary that there must be a unitary sovereign. Apparently, it may appear a paradox, and there is really a paradox in what Rousseau wanted to say.
But who will be the unitary sovereign in Rousseau's case?
Okay.
The people cannot be unitary.
No, not at
cannot
all.
be considered the unitary sovereign.
Yes. Quite intelligent question. Let me complete and then you will understand it. That is, he said that sovereignty, completely new term he coined. He said that sovereignty lies with the general will, capital G, capital W, general will of the community. But the twist lies in the meaning of the general will. What is general will? He categorically rejected any arithmetical calculation or considerations of majority and minority. He said these are all irrelevant questions. When I say general will of the community, I mean the will of the people for the moral good of the community. That means ipso facto, by definition, general will is moral and honest and effective. I hope you get the point.
But the question is, can there be no contradiction in this general will within the community?
How?
A community within a community, there may be a contradiction, majority and minority. Why did Rousseau did not come to that question, that rule of majority and minority? Was there any historical background or something like that?
No, not historical background as such. He wanted to mix Hobbes with Locke, taking the premise of Locke that there is popular sovereignty is good and necessary, but the conclusion of Hobbes that effectively sovereignty should be undivided. Undivided sovereignty, otherwise there will be chaos. So how to combine that philosophically? That is, if general will means wishing good of all, of community as a whole, then general will cannot err. It cannot make a mistake. By definition, it is always wishing the good of all.
Yes.
So how can it be wrong? So it is always right, and that has to be accepted by the people. And then he adds, even when a member differs from what the general will is, or the member for some deficiency of his own fails to understand what is general will, then that person will be forced to be free. This is, I quote his own language, that person, the dissenting person, has to be forced to be free. There is, the community as a whole will force him to accept the general will. Of course, he didn't explain how, but he said at some stage that dissenting person will come to realize what is the general will for the benefit or good of all. And once he realizes this, then he is naturally forced by the rest to accept the general will. And that is sovereignty of the general will.
So the concept of force is also there in Rousseau's concept of popular sovereignty.
Yes, but force is again, every word Rousseau uses is full of paradoxes. Force, he used the word force, but he never said it is physical force or numerical force. No. You go on discussing and discussing and discussing, and the situation will compel the person to realize that he is wrong. And that is why Rousseau is known as, in the history of interpolitical thought, the most stylistic thinker and the most confusing philosopher. He says so many things in so brief language, but leaves many things to be explained by others. And in fact, when we come to Hegel, we will note that Hegel was very much influenced by this Rousseauist tradition. And then about Hegel also the same thing is said, that Hegel was the father of many but owned by none. Because from Hegel, so many strands of political thought emerged. Everybody said, I got it from Hegel. Everybody is correct, but nobody is correct. Anyway, this is the highest of philosophizing, one can say, about theory of sovereignty. But the net conclusion is Rousseau stood for democracy. Most famous commentator on Rousseau, Maurice Cranstoun, in our time, again great British philosopher, he said that Rousseau transformed the theory of sovereignty into a radically alternative of absolute popular sovereignty. The normal conventional meaning of absolute sovereignty, he does not accept in so many language. But he comes to this by a radical use of his terms and phrases. But intentionally, net result is Rousseau's defense will be that I want good of the people as a whole. And so he said the question of minority and majority is irrelevant. Sometimes, just to explain a few minutes, just for example, we sometimes in our time, in our country, are confronted with this question of partisan government. But elected government cannot by definition, not by action, a elected government cannot by definition be partisan. Before election, two parties, many parties, they are possible. But once somebody is elected, then he represents the entire electorate. So the government of the day, whatever the government, is to be taken as government of the whole people. So that is more or less the inner explanation of what you said, how it is forced. It is forced philosophically. So Rousseau insisted on a genuine democracy, and that's why he fulminated against British democracy. He said the British people are never free. He has a famous quotation, his statement, that British people are free only for a moment when the voter drops his ballot paper in the ballot box. Once the ballot paper is thrown into the box, he is no more free, neither before nor after. So he ridiculed British democracy like this, because his philosophical configurations is this, that genuine democracy must be genuine in character. His ideal description is that people will meet under an oak tree on a Sunday morning and decide the problems of the community and go on deciding until a general will emerges. Let's see, where is the scope of election? No. In Rousseauist conception of democracy. So anyway, that we get one kind of, at a phase, a definition of sovereignty, conceptualization of state sovereignty. Then next great figure who gave this definition was Jeremy Bentham, a great English jurist and reformer. And he was the father of utilitarianism, as we say. His general idea and argument was that anything that has no utility must be rejected. Any idea, any institution, any system, anything, it must have its utilitarian value, utilitarian relevance to life and society. Otherwise, it is to be discarded. That is the utilitarianism. But on one point, he struck a new note. He totally rejected the old European tradition of natural right and natural law. He said it is completely bogus thing. In fact, law by itself is always man-made. Divine law or natural law, these are not to be accepted at all. But a law to be called a law, genuine law, is a positive law. That is, law made by parliament or legislature, whatever it is. Is sovereignty divisible? Hobbes said no. Bentham accepts, no, it can be divisible provided it is positive and written down and consciously made by parliament. That is, he was hinting at the federal system, that the sovereign power can be divisible between center and the provinces or states, etc. The scope of such a division was totally absent in Hobbes. And he is also not enigmatic like Rousseau. He said plain. That was characteristic of Bentham's style and personality. Everything straight and clear. So he said positive law, it may be unitary, it may be divisible, sovereignty may be divisible. And he rejected natural right, sovereignty of the natural right, which started with the Roman Cicero, I said so. But he didn't add much to the debate on sovereignty as such, beyond this. This is the kernel of his definition. Then we come to another very famous and enigmatic philosopher, whom I have just referred, German philosopher, Hegel. Now, Hegel was inspired by Rousseauist idea of the people. The English word, you cannot always realize its significance. By people in France and in especially in Germany, they use the word folk. Folk. We say folk song, folk music, so folk. Okay? In German language, it is spelled as V-O-L-K. Folk. This folk concept is inherent and implied in Rousseau when he said the people's will, general will, that is people as a whole. Because Rousseau was a native of a place near Geneva in Switzerland, very sparsely populated area. And there was no problem of people consulting each other and arrive a decision. So that idea Rousseau used or implied. Hegel took an hint from it. And in consonance with the German Romantic movement, German Romanticism, either in literature, poetry or philosophy, is this, that reviving that spirit of the old folk, Teutonic folk. So go back to that spirit, and there is no division among the people. Folk, people as a whole, this is the unit. And therefore Hegel, while giving his philosophy of right, very elaborate and comprehensive philosophical work, he says that it is basically sovereignty belongs to the folk. But again, like Rousseau, not in Rousseau's language, but in his own metaphysical language, he said, what is most fundamental in folk is ethics. Ethics of the folk is supreme. And that ethics of the folk, naturally, again by definition, cannot be wrong. People as a whole, their ethics, good part of morality, that is supreme. And this supremacy of the folk, he called folk sovereignty. Now he brings his own style, and that ethics of the folk is personified in the state with capital S. So state, according to Hegelian logic, what is this? State equal to personified ethics of the folk. So state is also always right.
Yes.
It cannot be wrong. So if state cannot be wrong, how can you oppose the state? So very dangerous but very philosophically correct conclusion that freedom of the people lies in total obedience to the state. This is Hegelian. He accepts individual, but individual gets his own freedom only when individual accepts the authority of the family. Family gets his own freedom when it accepts the authority of the neighborhood, and the neighborhood gets his own freedom when it accepts the authority of the state. So, all-pervasive, omnicompetent, sovereign state. That is the net result of Hegelian theory. But there is a underpinning, a footnote, that the state will embody the ethics of the people. This is one grand philosophy of the state, which is known as metaphysical theory of the state. Now, from that is unique by itself, and it had, I have just said a few minutes ago, that it had so many successors. The Nazis, the communist, the fascist, the individualist, even the liberals could argue their own way that we are following Hegel in their own way. These mutually antagonistic ideologies, they all claim their ancestry from Hegel. That is, he is the father of many but owned by none. Nobody owns Hegelian consequences. So, that is the break. Now we come, and with this more or less we will conclude our discussion today. That is John Austin, who again went back to Bentham. That is concept of positivist law. And Austin is known, very famous for what is called legal positivism. It is positivism in philosophy, that is nothing will be accepted without reason. This attitude, this philosophy applied to law, that is called legal positivism. Austinian theory is this, that there must be, by sovereign, he said, by sovereign I mean a determinate superior authority, and obviously legal authority. So John Austin is the culmination of what we call monistic theory of sovereignty. We are discussing so long, and now we come to a development, positive development, that it is legal sovereignty, it is monistic means it is one unitary, and there is no divisible aspect of sovereignty. Second point of Austin is this, that it is always legal in character. And then he illustrated, explained his point of view. Even when a king or a democratic government or whatever it is, the authority, who is vested with sovereign power, even when it behaves in an autocratic manner, he is right as sovereign. He has got the right, legal right to govern. Just as in our day we find Syrian president, he claims, I am the president of Syria. So I may easily kill thousands of people. But we'll see, just as our generation does not accept this argument, so also we will see in course of time that this too much emphasis on legalistic, positivistic theory of sovereignty is not acceptable to the civilized society. Anyway, let us understand Austin a little more. That is, obeying the primary duty, according to Austin, primary duty of the citizen is then, what can be?
To obey.
Yes, to obey the sovereign. Just, you have got one duty, obey the sovereign. In this way, he wanted to bring solidarity and unity in the government. Again, maybe influenced by the developments of the intense party rivalry between two major parties in his time, 19th century, etc., etc. But obviously he didn't mention all these things, but it happens like this. Is sociological process. Sovereign, he said, even sovereign can change the constitution. So that is the meaning, Austinian trap, that once sovereign is legal, you have to accept it. But he gives the concession, yes, sovereign can change the constitution, but in the change form, constitution is the supreme. So this theory of Austin has been criticized by many. First, the historical school of Sir Henry Maine. He said that formulation is not good, it is defective, because nothing in human history evolves without its historical background. So Austin has overlooked this point. Then positivists like H.L.A. Hart, very recently, 1961, in his famous book, The Concept of Law, he said this legislature is supreme, but subject to legal limitations. That legal limitations Austin missed. Then we find another philosopher in the tradition of what is called Neo-Hegelians, Thomas Hill Green. Now Thomas Hill Green rightly emphasized the content of ethics in Hegel, and he said, yes, sovereignty is sovereign. Sovereign is sovereign provided the ethics of governance is maintained. Then we come to a very famous professor of our time who is no more, Harold Lasky. He said that Austinian theory is mazed in such a way that it implies that the modern state a popular sovereign. That is popular sovereignty of the state. But it is impossible to give precision to the concept of popular, quote and unquote. What is popular? Lasky points out to this that Austin did not explain it. And last of all, let me conclude with Hayek, who was a supporter of conservatism, and he concepted that he argued that Hobbesian and Austinian concept of sovereignty is incompatible with the rule of law. So rule of law, the system which was devised and then nicely defined by Dicey, that rule of law is the real sovereign. If we obey this rule of law, then rights of the individual, stability of the government, and good of the community can be achieved, otherwise not. Otherwise not. So this is we find till now, today, the time available to us in this discussion. So we stop here today.
Thank you, sir.